Once the love is gone, it never comes back. You can't save a relationship on your own. It takes two to tango. You've heard those same things before. We all have. But after nearly 10 years of working with thousands of clients, I can tell you, these are some of the most damaging lies that people believe about relationships. And the worst part here, these sayings sound logical, which is why it's really easy to buy into these beliefs. But as we'll talk about, when you buy into these myths, you fall into a pretty certain death trap and you give up your power needlessly. But the truth is, once you let go of these limiting beliefs, repairing your relationship and bringing your ex back is easier than you could ever imagine. So in this video, I'm gonna show you 4 things that you can do to start saving your relationship today, even if you're doing it alone. You learn exactly how the whole "it takes two to tango" mindset keeps you stuck and what actually works instead, and how to use that new perspective to start creating traction right now, regardless of what your partner is doing. So let's start by unpacking this two to tango bullshit. And guys, this is gonna be part of a massive eye-opener for you. I think it's gonna completely change how you view relationships, reconciliation, and potential for reviving them as well. So please, all I can ask is pay close attention to this part. Maybe even rewatch it if you have to, so that these concepts really sink in. So "it takes two to tango" it's one of those phrases that people throw around when things start falling apart. And like I said, it sounds reasonable. It sounds logical. Because relationships are, after all, a two-person dynamic, right? They are two people contributing, communicating, and connecting together. So when your partner stops engaging, or when they've checked out, shut down, or even walked away, it feels logical to believe that without their participation, there's really nothing left to work with. And then you look around and see that most people trying to save their relationship or solve their problems, they do it through talking, through counseling, through therapy, trying to understand each other's love languages, attachment styles. So of course, again, right, with all that thought, it's natural to assume that it's the only way forward. And that's the first problem with the two to tango mindset. It assumes that both partners must act simultaneously for progress to happen. And I know this sounds crazy right now. So let me tell you a story here. And I had a client, I'm gonna call him Bob, okay, just to protect his identity. So Bob was on the verge of divorce. His wife of 26 years was completely checked out. Not just struggling, but checked the fuck out, right? Like, she was done. Not interested in any of the relationship, in rekindling anything. Seems like no hope in sight. And so Bob said to me, "You know what, Jeff, I want to take your program, but I just don't see how I can save this marriage if she's so done." And it's a twist. I had actually the opportunity to talk to his wife and get her perspective on this. And she said something interesting. She said, "I feel hopeless because Bob keeps telling me that he's changing and doing a lot of work to change. But honestly, I don't see Bob making any real or the right effort to change. And worse is that whenever I share how I really feel, he just shuts down even more, gets all mopey, and then stops everything." And when she said that, I thought, there it is right there. That's a feedback loop. So think about this, okay? Bob here feels hopeless because his wife feels hopeless. But his wife feels hopeless because Bob feels hopeless. So neither one of them wants to move because they're both waiting for the other to go first. And that is that two to tango mentality again, that's kept them locked in standstill for years, maybe even decades. So I told Bob, this is a lot more common than you think. And if you're willing to trust me here, here's what we need to do. First, you need to change yourself. And I know you think you've been doing some changing, but I'm gonna show you the changes that really matter. And not only that, I'm gonna show you the exact steps that I've taught thousands of clients on how to make those changes. Then I'll teach you how to change the environment. And again, the environment changes that really matter, okay? The 5 pillars. And when this environment shifts, Bob, you'll make it easier for your wife to change too. And when this happens, you'll see just how much potential your partner can blossom into all along. And you'll do this, Bob, not by forcing it, by controlling it, just by creating the conditions that make her feel safe, natural, and make her changes, her blossoming, feel safe and natural, and also possible. And of course, Bob was skeptical at first, right? Like many of my clients are at the start. And that's totally fair. I understand that. Because he's already tried therapy at this point. He's read books. He's even, I think, dipped his toes in some other programs. But I think at that point, he was able to see some of the bigger picture. So he joined the program anyway. He went all in on this program, on the process for 6 whole months, all in. And he started applying all the PTSG mindsets and made the internal shifts, practiced SOC, state of consciousness, worked on the frameworks. And the great thing is that, as he shifted internally, he also started to show up completely differently in how he communicated. It was like night and day. So he started using the TTH. He dropped the old defenses. He responded instead of reacted. And what happened was actually quite extraordinary. Slowly but surely, he transformed that culture, the relationship. First creating safety, then admiration, and then eventually alignment. And here's the beautiful part. As the environment changed, so did she. She became more open. She began to initiate more. She softened a lot more. She even dressed differently, put on makeup that she hasn't touched for like years. She laughed more. She wanted to be around him again. In just 6 months, they broke this decades-long stalemate of nothing happening. And they didn't do this by dragging each other through therapy, but they did it by breaking the loop, by ditching that two to tango bullshit story and creating real momentum. And there are 3 big lessons here in the story that I want you to understand. So number 1, relationships are feedback loops. With feedback loops, there's no single source of the problem. Both people are influencing each other constantly. So it's like gears turning in sync, for better or worse. Number 2, you have a massive power to shift that loop. I want you to know that even when it feels like you're doing nothing, that nothing still has an impact. Just like Bob's hopelessness here was actually feeding hers. Your choice to stay stuck, to believe in this two to tango stuff, that's your choice. And that choice is an example of your massive power in breaking or perpetuating that loop. And number 3, yes, you cannot change people directly, but you can change the environment. So again, I'm not saying it's false, right? It's true. You cannot change people, right, directly, but you can do a lot to change the environment, which will make it so much easier for people to not only blossom, but actually want to blossom. And I cannot overstate the importance of recognizing your own power that you have to change this. So once you understand this, you realize that your role in all of this is actually quite straightforward. Your job is not to convince your partner to work on the relationship. Your job is to start to change yourself first, so you can begin to start to change the culture, so you can change the direction of those feedback loops, so that the choice for your partner to come back and participate starts to feel like a natural, like a safe and obvious one. Now, most often when I give people this perspective shift, the very next question they have is, okay, but well, Jeff, how do I actually do that when my partner is not responding, or when I'm being ignored or rejected or even replaced? Well, let me show you how you may actually be swimming in opportunities to reverse those feedback loops and you don't even realize it. So whether it's stonewalling, gaslighting, anger, coldness, them saying things like, stop trying, I never loved you. In our program, we call all of this just resistance, okay? In our program, resistance is a very simple concept. It's this emotional, behavioral, or psychological pushback your partner gives when their mind perceives a threat to safety. And this is regardless of whether the threat is actually real or not. Resistance is not hostility for the sake of being mean. It's actually self-preservation. They are protecting themselves because although they can see your actions, they cannot trust the intentions behind those actions. So with all of us, your partner can only observe what you do, the action, but they have to assume what you mean, your intention. So for example, okay, I want you to imagine your car breaks down on the side of the road and you see this stranger pull up to help. Now, if the last time someone did that, pulled over to help you, you got mugged, how would you feel as this car is like pulling up to help you right now? What would you do? You probably assume bad intentions. You probably tense up, right? Because even if this new person genuinely wants to help, that's your self-preservation kicking in. And when you think about it, that's exactly what's happening with your partner. They're not reacting to what you're doing. They're reacting to what they believe is behind it, the intention behind it. So why can't they trust your intentions then? Well, that's $1 million question. And we'll unpack it in just a moment, right? But again, I want to double down on this. Just like the two to tango myth, most people don't understand what's actually happening here. So when they get resistance, they take that resistance very personally, which can lead them to make all kinds of assumptions and lead them to start resenting their partner, right? They might become hostile in response, or start like chastising their partner, punishing their partner, bad-mouthing them. They may even see their partner pull away and think, you know what, fine. You know what, you want to play this bitchy game? Well, two can play that game. And then you might do something to retaliate with your own coldness, and you distance yourself. Some people may swing the other extreme. They get panicked, they get worried, they get desperate to talk. They push for these big conversations to explain or to get closure. But at this point, their partner is done talking. So just like the two to tango problem, they create another negative feedback loop where they get offended, which poisons their actions, which then pushes their partner further away. When their partner goes away, they get more offended, and so on. And so all of this feels logical to do in the moment because of your complete and utter inability to interpret their resistance. So what should you do instead? Well, in our world, we see resistance as data, not rejection or something to be scared of, but simply feedback from the system. And when I say the system, I mean the emotional ecosystem between you and your partner. So that means that your partner's coldness, the silence, the anger isn't unreasonable or cruel. It's communicating something to you. They're giving you clues on what you need to change or what you might be missing. And when you start to see it through that lens, guys, that's when everything changes. Because remember that $1 million question I told you about earlier? So let's say here, right? You try to start a conversation with your partner. That's the action, okay? And your partner stonewalls you. What's actually happening here is your partner is making an assumption of your intentions behind your action. And what colors did the assumptions she make? How does she go from action to assuming intention? Well, it's her paradigms, her beliefs, her confirmation bias, her memories, her past experiences with you, and so on. So I say this is the $1 million question because when you can pause and you can ask yourself, okay, what does her stonewalling reveal about her paradigms, about her beliefs, about her confirmation bias, her memories, and her past experiences with me, and so on? That will give you a wonderful pivot and a wonderful opportunity to plant some seeds to slowly break through that stonewalling. So to give you an example here, you might say something like, hey partner, I see that you're in a bit of quiet right now, which is okay. I just want you to know that you don't have to say anything if you feel uncomfortable. I think if I put myself in your shoes, I can understand why you may be a bit lost for words. Because in the past, I realized that I did gaslight you a lot in a lot of conversations. And I have this bad habit of making everything about me. And I made conversations very difficult. And so difficult topics that made it even more difficult. And I think the worst part here is that I use a lot of what you say against you eventually. And I just want you to know that I'm aware that I've done this. And so I'm really wanting to come from a conversation from a different place right now where I don't do those things. Now again, right? Please do not use what I say as a script. This is not a one and done. Taking accountability in this way will often create more resistance. So understanding how to lean into more resistance like this, it's a non-negotiable. And now that I made that clear, I don't want to hear anyone saying, but Jeff, I said something similar. She still stonewalled me, because I want you to do the smart thing here and realize that if you get resistance after saying this, you just need to repeat the same pattern and PTSD in that resistance. And you only lose when you freeze up or you do nothing and crumble. And we talked about why this is and how this works, how PTSD works and so on, and this flow of leading into resistance in the last video. So please check that out after this video if you want to learn more. But I want you to think about how massive this is. Because when you start seeing resistance in this different light, you will stop seeing stonewalling as just them being avoidant types or narcissistic. You know, these labels that so many coaches and therapists love to throw around. Instead, you can start to see the stonewalling for what it really is. It's your partner desperately trying to tell you they don't feel emotionally safe enough to engage right now, for example. That they feel overwhelmed, for example. Or maybe their silence feels safer more than conflict right now. So instead of seeing their anger as them being aggressive or deliberately trying to hurt you, you'll begin to realize that not only is that your partner really saying, I feel powerless, but also her revealing or inviting you to understand the why behind her feelings. It's giving you the exact data point you need, a deeper look into her paradigms, her beliefs, her confirmation bias, her memories and past experiences with you, and so on. So when you learn to read resistance in that way, you realize that it's not actually a bad thing when you get resistance. It's actually a compass to show you exactly where safety needs to be rebuilt. And this is where genuine empathy can really start to grow, because you start asking better questions like, hey, what is this resistance showing me about how I've been showing up in the past? How might past behavior have reinforced their fears in the present? And with these better questions, you get better answers. The sort of answers that you might have stayed blind to for the rest of your life if you never pause and ask yourself these questions. And now, because you see things differently, you begin to also show up differently, which means your partner starts to experience you differently. And you begin to challenge their old story of you. And the confirmation bias that once told them, right, you'll never change, will, if you stay consistent here, begin to make way to a new story. Because it's really hard to keep believing someone hasn't really changed when every single new interaction you have with them feels safer than the last. And so this is how often, right, without a single move from your partner, with only one to tango, the feedback loop begins to shift direction. Not again because you force your partner to participate, but because she simply couldn't ignore the new evidence you're providing her anymore. And that's the power of changing how you see resistance. And that's why we say resistance, including stonewalling, is not a hindrance. It's a massive opportunity. But here's the thing, as well as intention as you might be, just deciding to change how you perceive these moments isn't going to be enough. There's another massive issue that I often see people fall into, an issue where you can still try to change the environment. You can try to take initiative or lean into resistance all you want. But with this mistake, you will just make the wounds worse and worse without even knowing it. And by the way, what I'm about to show you is going to be, I think, generally life-changing. So I'll go into as much detail as I can here. But if you're ready to go deeper and learn how to thrive through and how to respond to your partner in this way to make your partner coming back inevitable, then I want to invite you to check out the link in the description to learn how to enroll in my Relationships Revival program. So what most people do when they try to save their relationship is focus on looking the part. So they work on the externals that I call, saying the right things, doing the right things, and giving the right scripts and prepackaged responses. They think, if I just say enough of the right things, then she'll eventually believe my changes, right? But what you say and do is actually the start of the battle. So once you say that, that's when people's suspicions and doubts of you actually increases. Why does this happen? Because you saying you will change or have changed, again, that's the action. But again, remember that your partner doesn't just look at your actions, she also makes assumptions about your intentions. So if you're in a position where your partner doesn't really have any motivation to work on the relationship, usually what that suggests is that she's defaulting to making negative assumptions about your actions. It suggests that she doesn't have a very good paradigm, a very good belief system. Confirmation bias is negative, and her memories and past experiences of you and so on is negative. It suggests that, regardless of whether you're aware of it or not, to be honest, you may have said a lot of things or done a lot of things in the past, essentially raising her hopes. You didn't follow through. You didn't follow that up with your actions. And when you don't, that will crush her hopes and bring her down to disappointment. And we have to be really dead honest with ourselves here. If your partner's default is to look at your action of changing and assuming or resisting your intentions, there has to be a reason why. And if you really put yourself in your partner's shoes, you would kind of do the same thing, I think, if you think back to the cultural changes and the negative impacts of the culture you've made in the past. So it's like if you've touched a hot stove 100 times and you got burned every single time, right? You got hope, disappointment 100 times. The next time someone says, no. Okay, I know the last 100 times was not good for you, but it's cool now. It's safe to touch now. It won't burn you this time. You're not gonna just take your hand and just slap it down without a second thought. You would hesitate. You would hover, right? You would test it. You would wait for someone else to touch it first, right? It's like, oh, I don't want to play the fiddle here. Because even then, your muscle memory would do everything it could to prevent you from touching it again. Because if you did eventually touch it again, against your better instincts, and you touched that stove, and you got burned for like the 101st time, you'd feel such a fucking buffoon, right? It's like, how could you ever forgive yourself for letting that happen again? So it's kind of obvious why your partner is so hesitant and resistant and so doubtful whenever you say, I'm going to change. And this is why, again, in my videos and especially inside the program, I avoid scripts at all costs. Because a script on its own, it will allow you to signal and plant a seed to them that something is about to change. But again, what really matters is not the seed, it's how you water it. This means how you show up in the weeks and months to follow. So like we talked about in the last video, it's not just what you say, it's how you respond to the eventual resistance when they show up. It's how you handle their doubts, their silence, their pushback. And that's what tells the real story. And like I said many times in the past, it's not about being the perfect product. It's about showing them your perfect process or trajectory. That's what builds the most trust and proves that changes are for real. It's your consistency, how steep your growth curve is, and most importantly, how well you keep your old self from leaking out, especially in those subtle, subconscious ways you don't even realize. And that's why instead of giving you scripts like other coaches do, we teach you something deeper. So instead, I'll give you a perfect process, a way to truly follow through on everything you promised, not just in words, but in how you lead the relationship going forward. Nothing we do here is an act, okay? Everything is built on genuine, deep, internal changes that cannot be faked. So here's a quick overview, a peek of what this looks like. So we start by building what we call the bulletproof vest. And no, it's not about becoming cold, emotionless, or pretending things don't hurt. This is about changing your whole paradigm that fuels your emotions so that you can thrive. So a great example of this is what we discussed above. Once you change your paradigms about resistance and you stop seeing it as a threat, but you see those as opportunities, you'll notice you feel differently whenever you get resistance in the future, without us trying to use willpower, or what we say, right, clenching your asshole to keep your shit in. And this is really the magic, right? Learning to feel differently about the same things. Because when you feel differently about the same resistance like this, it makes it easier for you to do the right thing without feeling like you're trying hard to become someone you're not. And with that, you can also couple this with other internal shifts like expanding your band of operation, or EBO, as we call it in our program, or SOC, or state of consciousness. I know these are big sounding words, but we do talk a lot about this in our internal shift series. So feel free to check that out if you want to learn deeper about these internal processes. But essentially, to make it very simple, if we look back at the process of leaning into resistance that we showed you earlier, you'll see that to say what I said prior, it requires a strong emotional literacy and understanding of what your partner is feeling. It requires your minds to have an ability to investigate those feelings deeply and accurately. And so we cannot do that though with your partner if we cannot even do that with ourselves. So these two processes, EBO and SOC, are really about enhancing your ability to understanding and gain literacy and awareness of the complexities of your internal thoughts, of your own feelings, of your own belief systems. And when we do this, not only can we begin to calmly deal with issues, because we can feel calmer when we understand something, but it also allows us to do what we call finding the TBTT, or the thing behind the thing. So an example above, what is the thing behind the thing? In this case, behind her stonewalling. Or let's say, okay, your partner is mad at you for not taking out the trash. We can then use this to understand what is the thing behind the thing. In this case, what is the real reason for her anger for me not taking out the trash? Is it just about not taking out the trash, or is it something deeper than that? And this is a crucial skill that will allow us to really understand how to find the exact thing to pivot to when we plant seeds, like I did earlier in this video. And when you can do this, you realize that women and relationships are not that complex, man. And with all these fundamentals, the internal stuff mastered, we can then build the frameworks on top of this skills mountain. And we can learn the frameworks, which are the 7 conversational tools that you can use in conjunction that allows you to PTSD and lean into every single conversation that always plants safety and waters those seeds. And then finally, what will ensure that you're setting yourself up to follow through on your changes consistently and avoid letting this old self pop up is basically identity shifting. Basically, this is about programming yourself so that the right processes here become your lowest default, something you resort to without thinking, even when you're sleepy, tired, etc. So again, by now, you should be having a string of light bulb moments here. You've seen how the whole it takes two to tango stuff has really been holding you back. And that actually you don't need your partner to meet you halfway before things can start to shift. That number one, relationships are just one massive feedback loop. And like with Bob's case, with any feedback loop, there is no root cause or there's no source. It's just one person feeding the other and vice versa. Number two, you must also understand that if you're in a feedback loop with your partner, you have a massive power in either perpetuating or breaking that feedback loop. And number three, while it's true that you cannot change people, you can do a lot to change their environment, which will allow it to be so much easier for people to not only blossom, but actually want to blossom with you as well. And remember, you have a lot of power in determining this feedback loop. You've also learned to interpret resistance, to see your partner's anger, silence, and coldness not as rejection, but as communication, as the exact data points you actually need to lean into and slowly break through resistance. And that when you start taking it personally, you finally start seeing what they've been trying to tell you all along. And finally, right, we define the skills and changes in your programming you need to make to be able to do the two things above consistently effectively and effortlessly. And these are the massive paradigm shifts. And for most people, they're the difference between another round of false hope and the beginning of real change that allows their partner to slowly rebuild their own attraction towards you without you having to force them back in. And now that you understand why your relationship fell apart and what needs to change, the next question is, how do you actually communicate differently now? How do you talk to your partner, especially when they're cold, angry, or distant, in a way that builds safety instead of breaking it? Well, make sure to watch the next video because I'm going to teach you a completely new way to communicate. One that doesn't really rely on scripts or manipulation, but built on genuine desire to change that your partner can actually start to believe in.